Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to hear could change everything. If you've ever interacted with someone who distorts your words, drains your spirit, and leaves you questioning your own perception, you are not crazy. You're likely dealing with a narcissist. And today, I'm going to give you a single sentence, just one, that can stop a narcissist in their tracks and make them quietly fear your strength from that moment on. Are you ready? Because after you hear this, there's no turning back. This is the kind of truth that sets you free. When dealing with a narcissist, the first critical truth to grasp is that their behavior has nothing to do with you. Narcissists operate from a deep sense of insecurity, cloaked behind layers of arrogance, manipulation, and a relentless need to control. They often seek out individuals who are compassionate, thoughtful, and introspective because those traits make you more likely to overlook their mistreatment. And second, guess your instincts over time. They methodically erode your confidence and sense of self. They gaslight you, twist conversations, and make you feel like you're always the one to blame. This creates confusion, shame, and isolation. You begin to think, if I were just a bit more patient, kinder, quieter, or more understanding, maybe they'd finally treat me with respect. But that moment never arrives. The reality is narcissists rarely change because they don't see their behavior as a problem. They shift blame, project their issues, and manipulate with precision, but genuine accountability. That's almost non-existent. In their eyes, they're perpetually the victim or the hero, never the source of harm. Once you begin to recognize this for what it is, you see it's not a random occurrence. It's a repeating pattern. They don't mistreat you because you failed them. They do it because it keeps them in control. Their entire method is built to destabilize your emotions, keep you constantly unsure and chasing after their validation. And that's where awareness becomes your superpower. The moment you realize that you are not the cause of their dysfunction, you stop trying to fix what was never broken in you. Their rage is not your responsibility. Their criticism is not a reflection of truth. And their so-called love, when it surfaces, is conditional, calculated, and frequently weaponized. Recognizing narcissistic manipulation means calling out the tactics as they happen, spotting patterns, and no longer internalizing the chaos they bring. You don't have to argue, justify, or defend yourself constantly. You just have to stop participating in the game they've designed. Because once you see the game, you can choose not to play. Narcissists are motivated by three fundamental needs: control, validation, and confusion. Every word they say, every move they make is in service of these three. They might win your trust with charm, then cut you down with criticism, or stir up conflict to keep you emotionally unstable. Control is the centerpiece of their world. They need to feel that they're the ones directing your emotions, dictating what you think, how you feel, and even how you see yourself. And when they sense that grip loosening, they retaliate through silent treatments, dramatic outbursts, or shifting into a victim role to reestablish their power. But their manipulation isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, crossing your boundaries just enough to test your reaction, redirecting blame, or making every discussion about them. Validation is their emotional lifeline. They crave praise, attention, admiration, not simply to feel good, but to survive emotionally. When you offer them validation, you're feeding their fragile ego. But if you withhold it, set a boundary, say no, or challenge their narrative, they react as if you've wounded them deeply. Criticism and rejection don't just upset them, they destabilize their entire sense of self. This is why they often build social circles, filled with people who reinforce their illusions and cut off anyone who threatens it. You'll notice this pattern. If you flatter them, you're valued. If you question them, you're discarded, or worse, attacked. They'll try to charm you, to keep you close, or punish you emotionally when you step outside their control. And then there's confusion, their most lethal tool. Narcissists deliberately blur lines between truth and fiction, affection and control, kindness and manipulation. They want you doubting your memories, questioning your feelings, and second, guessing your decisions. Confusion makes you easier to manipulate. They'll contradict themselves, deny things they clearly said, and paint your reasonable reactions as irrational. This constant disorientation traps you in a loop where you're always trying to clarify, defend, and prove yourself. And that loop is exhausting. But for them, it's fuel. The longer you're confused, the more power they hold. When you understand that narcissists thrive on control, validation, and confusion, you start to recognize their behavior for what it really is: tactical, You stop personalizing their attacks. You stop believing their drama is your fault. You begin to see the emotional whiplash as strategy, not a reflection of your worth. And with that awareness, you gain the power to respond differently. Because here's the truth. The most powerful thing you can do when dealing with a narcissist is to stop feeding their emotional needs. They want a reaction. Tears, anger, desperation, frustration, because each emotional response tells them that they still have influence over you. When you argue, plead, or over-explain, you're giving them fuel, proving they still occupy space in your emotional world. That's why emotional detachment is not a luxury. It's a form of protection. But don't mistake detachment for numbness. It's not about shutting down your feelings. It's about no longer giving them direct access to those feelings. Calm, composed detachment looks like neutrality in your voice, brevity in your words, and unshakable boundaries. Narcissists are wired to seek emotional engagement. When you stop offering it, they notice. At first, they may escalate. They'll provoke harder, create chaos, or suddenly play the victim to trigger your response. But if you stay grounded, if you remain consistently detached, they start to realize the shift. You're no longer feeding their addiction, and that's when your power begins to return. You stop explaining your choices. You stop justifying your feelings. You stop begging for clarity or closure. Instead, you observe. You see their games for what they are. You recognize manipulation as manipulation, not a reflection of your inadequacy. Detachment also means holding boundaries without guilt. Narcissists are masterful at testing limits. They'll guilt trip you, call you heartless, act confused about what you're asking, or accuse you of overreacting. But when you stand firm, when you say no and mean it, when you exit the chaos instead of engaging, you send a message. You're no longer emotionally available for their mind games. You're not attacking them, exposing them, or trying to win. You're just not participating anymore. And that kind of calm, grounded power, it unsettles them more than anything else. Detachment also guards your energy. Narcissists are like emotional parasites. They feed off your emotional highs and lows, your confusion, your need to make things right. Stay too long, and you'll feel depleted, anxious, lost. But when you step back emotionally, mentally, even physically, you begin to recover. Your clarity returns. Your intuition sharpens. You remember who you were before their influence clouded your identity. And in that clarity they lose their grip. Because nothing shakes a narcissist more than someone who's no longer reactive, no longer afraid, and no longer under their emotional control. You don't have to argue. You don't have to expose them. You just have to stop engaging on their terms. Emotional detachment isn't weakness. It's strength. It's a declaration that says, I know who I am. I don't need your validation. I'm no longer participating in your chaos. And that shift, they feel it instantly. But here's the most powerful part. There's one sentence, just one, that can completely change the dynamic when dealing with a narcissist. A sentence that reclaims your time, your peace, and your authority. Here it is. I'm not available for this conversation. That's it. Simple, clear, unshakable. It doesn't insult. It doesn't explain. It doesn't argue. It simply ends the game on your terms. Narcissists thrive on engagement. They want the circular arguments, the emotional reactions, the long justifications that they can twist and manipulate. But this sentence, it disrupts their entire approach. They may criticize you, provoke you, or plead. But when you say, I'm not available for this conversation, you've drawn a line, one they can't cross unless you allow it. You're not explaining. You're not defending. You're not giving fuel. You're simply reclaiming your energy in that boundary. That's what they fear most. Whether they're trying to ignite a fight, guilt, trip you, gaslight you, or lure you into explaining yourself for the 100th time, you can use it as a clean and firm exit. It leaves very little room for argument. If they push back, you can repeat it calmly, or walk away without further engagement. There's no need to defend it. That's the entire point. Narcissists want you to keep explaining, because it keeps the door open for them to manipulate your words and distort the narrative. When you stop explaining, you stop giving them that access. It's worth noting that, at first, a narcissist may not react positively to this boundary. They might escalate, mock your calm, or accuse you of being distant or That's because they're sensing a loss of control, and that is deeply unsettling for them. But your role isn't to manage their feelings. It's to preserve your own inner peace. The more consistently you use this sentence, the clearer the boundary becomes. Over time, They start to realize that their old methods no longer have the same effect. They might try new tactics, but the more detached and centered you stay, the more their grip loosens. The sentence doesn't just create space, it empowers you. It reminds you that you don't have to attend every conflict you're invited to. You don't have to justify your emotions or explain your truth to someone who has no intention of truly listening. You can decide plainly and confidently that you are unavailable for dysfunction, manipulation, and emotional chaos. That's not avoidance, it's self-respect. And for a narcissist, that kind of quiet refusal is one of the most unsettling experiences they can have. It signals that you've stopped trying to earn their acceptance. You've stopped needing their approval, and that's what actually makes them uncomfortable. When you say, "I'm not available for this conversation," it's not just a collection of words, it's a declaration of value. That single sentence sets a boundary that says, "I won't be dragged into confusion, dominated, or emotionally spun." It's not simply about ending an exchange, it's about reclaiming your autonomy. Narcissists are skilled at wearing down your boundary. They prod, test, and push until you begin to question if you're overreacting or just trying to protect yourself. But this sentence ends all of that. It's a verbal barrier they can't cross without revealing their desperation. What makes it powerful is that it delivers the one thing a narcissist can't tolerate: loss of emotional control. They want you on the defensive. They want explanations, justifications, and emotional vulnerability. When you calmly say you're unavailable, you leave them with nothing. No reaction, no emotion, no handle to pull. You show them that your peace of mind is worth more than their opinion, and that alone is a serious blow to their ego, because they've built the entire relationship dynamic on the belief that they can rattle you whenever they want. This sentence also reveals the real source of power. Narcissists live under the illusion that they set the emotional tone, that they hold control, and that you rely on them for your sense of self. But when you detach from that narrative and say, "I'm not available for this," you take back the script. You define the rules, you set the emotional parameters, you decide what conversations you participate in and on what terms, and that kind of grounded authority doesn't need shouting or threats. It just needs calm conviction and follow through. The sentence also acts as a mirror. It forces the narcissist to sit with themselves, without a target, without a scapegoat, without someone to project onto. That silence is loud for them. They'll likely try to break it by accusing you of being passive, aggressive, cold, or emotionally distant. But again, that's just, your role is not to take it. Your responsibility is to remain steady in your self-worth. Because every time you enforce this boundary, you reinforce the reality that your emotional space is no longer up for grabs. Consistency is crucial. If you use this phrase once, and then fall back into old habits, the next time they test you, they'll quickly recognize that it's just a temporary tactic. But if you repeat it often, calmly, without emotional charge, it becomes your new standard. You're no longer a predictable source of emotional fuel. You become someone who understands their worth and protects it even when it's uncomfortable, even when they try to shame you into giving it up. That's when their control starts to unravel. Not because you confronted them loudly or exposed them, but because you quietly refuse to continue participating in their dysfunction. You become unreadable to them, not in a chaotic or unstable way, but in a powerful, steady way. They can't predict your response, because you're no longer reacting. And that is exactly what unnerves them. Nothing rattles a narcissist more than realizing they no longer have access to your emotional world. Consistency is the ultimate disruptor when it comes to dealing with narcissists. It's not one dramatic blowout, one bold sentence, or one awakening that ends their influence. It's your repeated, unwavering decision not to play their game anymore. Narcissists operate in repetitive loops. They provoke guilt, flatter, manipulate, and then start all over again. They're constantly assessing whether they can still get a reaction, still bend your boundaries, still keep you tied to their web. But when you break the cycle, not once, but every single time, they start to feel the shift. You send a message that no emotional outburst or explanation ever. Calm consistency confuses them. They're used to controlling the tempo to throwing people off balance. But when you remain grounded, when you respond instead of react, they lose their leverage. They don't know how to handle someone who won't get pulled into the chaos, who won't argue, beg, or justify. That's when you're no longer under their spell. This terrifies them, because their power depends on your emotional unpredictability. It's easy to manipulate someone who's reactive, but someone who is calm, steady, and emotionally unavailable for games, that's nearly impossible to manage. It doesn't mean you won't still feel hurt, frustrated, or angry. You will, The difference lies in what you choose to do with those emotions. Do you react and get pulled back into their cycle, or do you acknowledge your feelings and still choose to respond with clarity and self-respect? Consistency isn't about being perfect, it's about commitment. It's about showing up for yourself again and again, even when it's hard. When you say no, you follow through. When you set a limit, you maintain it. When you walk away, you don't turn back just because they suddenly switch tones or say all the things you've wanted to hear. You already know it's a script, not sincerity. The more consistent you are, the more reliable you become, not for the narcissist, but for yourself. You start trusting your own perception again. You stop second-guessing your experience. That internal trust is a direct threat to a narcissist, because it means you don't need their version of the story anymore. You don't need their approval, their apology, or their validation. You have your own and you believe in it. That's what makes your consistency your protection. It keeps you from falling back into old patterns. The fixer, the empath, the peacekeeper. It keeps you out of their emotional spin cycle. They may still try to bait you, provoke you, or act like they've changed, but you won't be moved. You'll see it clearly for what it is, another manipulation. You won't be shocked, and you won't be swayed. You'll hold your boundary and stay grounded. What truly dismantles a narcissist's control isn't one grand act. It's the decision to choose yourself, over and over again, to act from wisdom rather than emotion, to prioritize peace over approval. That's what makes you untouchable, not because you've out-argued them, not because you've exposed them, but because you've simply stopped showing up to the